All right, on our studies on theology tonight, we're still looking at the attributes of God. We're getting close to the end of this study. Not too many more left, but there's a couple that's very, very common, I guess, when we think about God, but it's probably a couple of the more important ones, and maybe the couple that we'd like to talk to you about the most. And the first one here is the fact that God is merciful. God is merciful. And I'll tell you one thing, if you're like most people, you're just glad that God's merciful. We love to hear about the mercy of God. And so as I have a definition here, the mercy is that eternal principle of God's nature that leads him to seek the temporal good and eternal salvation of those who have opposed themselves unto his will, even at the cost of infinite self-sacrifice. God's mercy is optional in that he is no way obligated to save sinners, however he chooses to do so. You know, that's God's mercy. He chooses to save those who want to come to him. He's merciful. And, if there's a lot of things about God's attributes we've seen, and, God is just. And you remember one of the things that we talked about is how the mercy and how he could reconcile justice and mercy and salvation was all at the cross. The reason God can be merciful to sinners is because of the cross. The cross is where Jesus paid for the sins of humanity. It was there that he took the penalty, which satisfied, as we say so many times, the holy, righteous demands of God for sin. And by him paying for those things, God can pardon the sinner by his mercy and still be a just God, still be a holy God. And so God is merciful. And so we're so glad of the mercy of God. And that is one of the common things throughout the Bible. You see mercy over and over again. You see it throughout the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament. And a couple terms that sort of go along with mercy in the Bible is the word compassion and pity. Both of these terms also has to do with the mercy of God. Sometimes we see that as that way. So sometimes it's the compassion of God, sometimes the mercy of God mentioned. Maybe we have some Bibles ready. We'll look at a few scriptures here as we study through this part. Maybe somebody looks at James 5:11. There's a New Testament passage, James 5:11. Someone go ahead.
Behold, we count them happy which you hear. You have heard the patience of Job, and you have seen the end of the Lord. That the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. Pitiful and tender mercy to this old suffering Old Testament saint. He was he showed a lot of mercy even to him. And so it's just the fact that, God is merciful to his creation. And we need mercy because we're all sinners, we're all lawbreakers, and even as Christians, many times we not only need mercy as salvation, need mercy, and but even if you become a Christian, many times we blow it, and as a believer, and we would like the mercy of God in our lives. One of the great Old Testament examples of a believer is really needing mercy was David. In the Bible. Remember King David? I mean, talking about really having some problems, when he committed immoral things with Bathsheba and had her husband killed. I mean, you just think of that. And he knew it was wrong. He wasn't like he just didn't, it was some kind of dumb thing, he didn't know what was going on. He knew it was wrong and went ahead and plowed right forward and do it. So he wrote Psalm 51 after he got right with God. And Psalm 51 is basically the heart of a believer who's saying, God, I am in great need of your mercy. I don't deserve anything, but I cry out for mercy. And what did he do? He admitted he was sinful. He admitted to God he was wrong. He admitted that he was a miserable person, and his iniquities was great. And so his admittance to God, that was a humbling. It was a contrition of his heart. And God was granted him mercy. God granted him that mercy so that he would not be, his life would be taken. In the Old Testament, it wasn't, sometimes I know they had a sacrificial system, but it wasn't like, well, you can just do anything you want to and bring in a lamb and throw it on the altar and it'll be all right. It wasn't something like that. David knew that, all the lambs in the world, wouldn't do anything about this. He just needed God's mercy. You just can't, I know you just can't, I just need your mercy. Justice, if I get justice, it'll be death. And so he cried out to God, and God did give him mercy. Now, like Abraham with his sin, David had to also live with the consequences of his. There was mercy given, but there was also a lot of heartache for his life. The child died that was brought into the world, and then his home was constantly in battle. From that point on, David really never lived a very peaceable life after that. There was a lot of tension in his home. There was conflict in his home. There was a lot of this going on. So David received mercy in that his life was spared, and God still was able to minister to him, and he felt that he could still be useful for God. And we have this beautiful psalm that was written out of this time, a hope for mercy. So, when we as Christians sometimes fall and sometimes make bad mistakes or commit terrible sins, we're glad that even for a Christian, it's not just the lost person who needs mercy. Many times it's the saved person who needs mercy of God. Throughout Scripture, there's different illustrations throughout the Bible there, especially in the Gospels of this. Maybe somebody can look at, here's one of Matthew 9:27, just an instance of Jesus coming by and showing. Anybody, just read it there.
And when Jesus departed thence, 2 blind men followed, crying and saying, Thou Son of David, have mercy on us.
Have mercy on us. They just wanted God's redemption in their life. They just wanted somebody to reach out to them. I always thought this was a real neat one here. In Luke 7:13, the widow in Nain. Someone, Luke 7:13. Anybody?
And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said unto her, Weep not.
Now, what was the story there? The widow of Nain, I didn't have you read the whole context, but the widow was, her only son had just died. And Jesus came by one day, and there was a funeral going on. And, and this woman here had lost her only son. Evidently her husband was gone, she was a widow, and so there was no more support for her, no family, and God said, I had compassion, or that is, I had mercy, I wanted to do something, and he raised the widow's son from the death. Can you imagine that? That sort of stopped that funeral procession, didn't it? And he did it. No one asked him to do it. He just had mercy and compassion on this poor woman who lost this one. Just think of what it would be like. The only person in the universe that could do something about that day was there in her town. Wouldn't that have been something? There would be nobody else in the world, there's nobody else in the universe could do anything about it. But one day, on her worst day of her life, maybe the most saddest day of her life, Jesus comes by. And her son is raised. And he did it not because anybody deserved it. Other people that died probably on that day. Other people he was touched by this woman who had no one. And he raised her up, raised his son up. How about Matthew 14:14 there on the multitudes in there? Matthew 14:14. He had compassion toward them. He wanted to do something to the hungry group of people. Mercy goes in a lot of different ways, and I've seen a lot of different things. How about Luke 18:13?
done so much as he finally had it's not one of those things God must fulfill.
Okay, this was the old publican. He was the tax collector, wasn't he? And these tax collectors, they were these ruthless people from the Romans that collected money for the Romans, and they weren't very nice people many times. And he just said, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." Here was a person that God really reached out and touched. And then the Apostle Paul. How about someone 1 Timothy 1:13 there?
Who was before a blasphemer and a persecutor and injurious, when I obtained mercy because I did it ignorantly in unbelief.
And verse 16 also, while you're in there.
Howbeit, for this cause I obtained mercy, that in me first Jesus Christ might show forth all long-suffering, for a pattern to them which should hereafter believe on him to life everlasting.
So Paul was a man who definitely believed in the mercy of God. He needed God's mercy because he was a religious man who was very zealous for his religion of Judaism, but he was to the point he had people murdered and everything else for his cause, and he was so fortunate, he was so glad and blessed that God chose him to be used in this ministry. So he thanked God for his mercy. All of us can really thank God for his mercy. And then, okay, I thought maybe you had something to say. Okay, that's good. Thank you for that, though. But we're all people of mercy. Another thing that goes with mercy, another attribute of God is his being graceful, being a God of grace. He's a gracious God. Mercy and grace, they sort of all go hand in hand, don't they? As we know, I know most of you know, mercy is when we don't receive what we do deserve. Okay? Grace is receiving what we don't deserve. And so you can see salvation is both things. Mercy is because we're sinners, born sinners in this world, what we do deserve is a place of hell. That's what we do deserve, the Bible teaches. In his mercy, he keeps us from there. But it's not just from there, it's somewhere else. It's grace. And God's grace allows us to have a perfect place in eternity with him in heaven. So it's withholding something from us that we deserve, or something terrible, into giving us something that is so great it's beyond imagination, in his very presence. And his grace goes not just a place, but it's a relationship. We're not just saved from hell to have a good place in heaven, but not just to be in heaven, but to be the sons of God. Okay, God not only saved us from sin and from being a sinner, He took us and made us His sons. It's like, He adopted us in His family and gave us the heirships of all that He has. That's grace. It'd be great just to say, okay, you're not going to go to hell, you're just going to get to live in heaven one day, and you're not going to be in any relationship to God, but you're going to have a nice place to live. That'd be great, but God says, no. That's not what salvation is. Salvation is you taken from sinfulness into a saint who's a joint heir with the Son of God. And God the Father says, all that my Son has, you shall share with him in eternity. That's grace. And so we see grace in the Scriptures is this, that it's beyond our imaginations of how God is so good to us. It's something that we cannot pay for. It's something that we do not deserve. It's something to give to us only what God can provide. And we'll read a few verses here that sort of helps us to get a big picture of that. If you'd like to read all of them, there's a lot of verses there in your book if you want to go back and see some of these. But things about grace is, first of all, God's grace is always a free gift. Let's read Let's read Romans 3:24 there for a minute. Just somebody read that one.
Being justified freely by His grace, through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus.
Being justified freely, without any cost, by His grace. You know, if you have to pay for it, if I had to earn it, it would no longer be grace. God's grace is greater than all of man's sins. Have Romans 5:20. Romans 5:20. Someone have it?
Moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound, but where sin abounded, grace did not much more abound.
Okay, where sin abounded, grace abounded more. Okay, so no matter what your sin is, grace is greater. God in His grace, there's nobody can say, well, my sin was so bad, God's grace couldn't take care of it. My sin was so awful, God's grace wasn't sufficient enough. And you know, sometimes people, though, have a little bit of pride, and they like that. They may say, well, you know, God's grace was part of my salvation, but you know, I need to work because I think I need to do something. You know, that's pride. You know, no, God's grace abounds above all our sin. It's sufficient. There's nothing you can do to help God out with your sin. It's all of the grace of God in salvation. And so it abounds farther than our sin can abound. No matter where the limit of your sin was at, God's grace was greater than that. And so that's a great understanding of how far it goes. And there's no way, there's just so many things about it. God's grace, even for let's see, Hebrews 4:16 about prayer and how God's grace is involved with that. Hebrews 4:16, or someone like to get it.
Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need.
Okay, grace in time of need. Okay, even as far as it's entering His throne is all of God's grace. The ability to talk to God, to go to His presence, is all of God's grace. I mean, how many of us deserve? You know, do we deserve? You know, a meeting with God? We don't deserve it. Do I deserve a place at the throne? Oh no, I don't deserve it. You know, it's grace. When we pray, it's going into the presence of the throne. It's there we talk to God with whatever we want to talk about, with anything all open. Do we deserve that? Well, no, we don't deserve that, but that's grace. So God's grace is involved with our salvation. It's involved with every part of our salvation. It's really about everything we understand as a Christian, that we just the fact that the ability to function, to live, to have the ability to do anything, we can say it's all of the grace of God. God's grace is His power to do what we cannot do on our own. And it flows from Him because that's His attribute of grace. And so God is a God of mercy. You know, there's very few of us can say, God, I plead for your justice. You know, because we plead for His justice, that would be very harsh, because justice is very much a letter of the law. But we can all say, God, I'm glad that you're a merciful God. I plead for your mercy. And say, God, I need your grace today. That's what flows from you. To give me the power I don't deserve in order to accomplish what I need to do for your glory and your will. And it flows from Him. And from Him, He's like a fountain that flows mercy. And it flows grace. And then we won't get into this with next week. we'll see one of these great ones about God is love, the love of God that flows also, what that ties all this into. All right, so tonight we looked at God is a merciful God. God is a God of grace. I'm glad of God that we know God in that way. That's all for this evening in this study, and we'll stop here at this point.